In this bonus episode of the Lava Flow, I have all of my Libertarian Party presidential candidate breakdowns put together in this one single episode. Plus, I give my final official endorsement.
Welcome to the Lava Flow, channeling the flow of information to the libertarian, anarcho-capitalist, voluntarist, and agorist community. Find us at thelavaflow.com. Here's your host, Roger Paxton.
Thank you for joining me this week. Coming to you from the state where the first home video game was invented by Ralph Baer, this is the show that will bring you the people, places, and events that everyone in the Liberty Revolution needs to know. You can catch me on Twitter at the Lava Flow Pod. This is a bonus episode, the My Libertarian Presidential Endorsement Edition, and it's Tuesday, May 17th, 2016. If you've been listening to the show the last few weeks, you know that I've done a breakdown on the top 4 libertarian candidates for President of the United States. Based on polling, I chose to discuss Gary Johnson, Austin Peterson, John McAfee, and Darrell W. Perry. I wish I had the time to do more candidates, but I just didn't. Now, it's my hope to get this bonus episode in front of as many delegates to the LP convention as possible before the Memorial Day weekend. So please share this episode anywhere and everywhere that you believe that there might be delegates paying attention. So many people are not really aware of the good and the bad that I've brought up about every candidate in this episode, and I think that it is a vital information for delegates. Thank you so much for your help in spreading this message. And don't forget, at the end of these breakdowns for each candidate, I will have my official endorsement for the race. So without further ado, here we go. Starting with my comments about Gary Johnson from episode 34 of The Lava Flow. You can listen to the entire episode at thelavaflow.com/34.
Statist's got a state.
I took some time out and watched the first part of the Stossel Libertarian Party presidential debate this past weekend, and I must say I never thought I would be talking about it in this segment. Statist's gonna state, but unfortunately that's where I find myself. As many of you know, I was a big supporter of Gary Johnson in 2012 after he won the LP nomination. I voted for his opponent and my friend Arlie Wrights for the nomination, but that didn't stop me from supporting Johnson heavily after he won the nomination. There were a few things that Johnson said that I wasn't 100% thrilled with, like his support for the fair tax, but I still gave him my support. I was also put off a bit by his comments about banning the burqa to 3 different reporters on the day he announced his candidacy this time around. But I was still withholding judgment until I could learn more. After watching the first part of this debate, I now know more, and it is not pretty. Full disclosure, I'm actually recording this before watching the second part of the debate, even though the second part of the debate will be out several days before this episode. I'm recording this episode early because I'm going with my family to an indoor water park for a few days during the weekend and week of the release of this episode. So next week, I'll be coming back to talk about the second half of this debate in the next episode. So let's talk about some of the statist comments that Johnson made in this debate. He is calling for Congress to declare war on ISIS because that's just what we need, another endless war in the Middle East. Has he learned nothing from the last 15 years, or is he just pandering to racist voters and trying to follow Trump's lead on sowing division and hatred for votes? I just don't get this. My biggest issue with him in this debate was that he flat out said, in response to a direct question from Austin Peterson, that a Jewish baker should be forced to bake a cake for a Nazi. I shit you not. I almost came out of my shoes when I heard him say that. I had to rewind several times to make sure. This is a simple issue. Force is wrong. And forcing someone to do anything for another man is slavery, plain and simple. This is the perfect example of people calling for positive rights and not understanding that positive rights strip rights away from others by force and are therefore illegitimate. And another place in the debate that he completely lost me is that because it may be a bit inconvenient to change language in several laws to get the government out of marriage, he doesn't support that. However, he does support marriage equality. Well, I'll be goddamned. He basically said that he doesn't support liberty because it may be a little bit inconvenient. What the actual fuck? I mean, I much prefer Thomas Jefferson's quote on liberty and inconvenience when he said, quote, "I would rather be exposed to the inconveniences attending too much liberty than those attending too small a degree of it." Yes, liberty is going to be inconvenient, folks. Yes, it's going to be tough. And yes, it may be uncomfortable, but it is morally the only choice, and we cannot select an LP candidate who doesn't understand that. And the final straw for me was when he said that he not only supported equal pay for equal work, but would keep an open mind to legislation forcing that on employers. It shows that he not only has a fundamental misunderstanding of basic economics, but also a fundamental misunderstanding of libertarianism, the free market, and the non-aggression principle. But we'll come back to the nap in a few minutes. Now, it wasn't all bad. He did say some good things in this debate, but nothing that would separate him from his opponents, which is why he's now at the bottom of my list of the top 4 candidates. It's so bad that, frankly, I can't even see voting for him in the general election if he wins the nomination. That will be tough for me. I should not have to hold my nose when voting for a Libertarian Party candidate. I may just not vote if he gets the nomination. I don't know yet. But let's talk about some of the good things that he said. He said that he would cut all foreign aid because it is used more to prop up dictators than to help people. Absolutely. But Austin Peterson made the same claim, and this should be a no-brainer for any Libertarian candidate. He also said that he was against the death penalty. But again, this is a no-brainer, and all the other candidates said the same thing. He also confronted his personal cannabis use head-on, saying that he joins 130 million other people who use cannabis and he believes legalizing cannabis would lead to less substance abuse. Again, well done here, but nothing that any other candidate hasn't said before. But outside of this debate and outside the topic of banning the burqa that we discussed previously on this show, what other problems does Johnson have? Now, I mentioned earlier that we would come back to the non-aggression principle, which is the underlying principle of libertarianism and the pledge that must be signed by members of the Libertarian Party, including, presumably, Johnson himself. In March of this year, at the Pennsylvania LP Convention, Larkin Rose asked the LP candidates at the debate if they abide by the NAP and if they thought the NAP was compatible with the U.S. Constitution. This is a long quote, but I'm going to read it verbatim anyway. Johnson said, quote, "This is one of those questions where America, or me anyway, it just goes over my head. And I'm sorry, but it does. It's not something I engage with people in conversation, and if I do, it just lays over. So the fact that government should not be engaged in force, how that's relative to the Constitution, I really can't answer the question. I'm not smart enough to answer the question." One of the debate moderators reminded him at this point that the NAP is a basic libertarian principle and that anyone seeking the LP nomination should be able to answer that question. His response to that was, "I know I should, but I can't. I hear what you're saying. But these are the questions that I think people get. That you knee-jerk the answer and then you end up having to explain something you can't explain. It's not something I relate to. Sorry, but it's not. It just goes right over my head." I really hope that some delegates to our LP National Convention in Orlando later this year are listening to this show. If a basic and fundamental principle of libertarianism goes over his head, how can you vote for him to be our nominee? If he can't understand what babies understand, that it is not okay to hit or to steal, then how can we trust him with being the voice of our party during this election? Sadly, even though I supported him strongly 4 years ago, I don't think that we can give him that nomination. This was the nail in the coffin for me. And finally, my last criticism of Johnson actually comes from a good friend of mine, Thomas Knapp. Thomas Knapp is the man behind the Napster blog at knappster.blogspot.com. He also does the Napster podcast on iTunes and SoundCloud, and my favorite part of his activism is the William Lloyd Garrison Center for Libertarian Advocacy Journalism, where he writes articles that get picked up by mainstream papers, and picked up a lot. He is doing real outreach with this project with his sharp, witty, and always on-point articles. I think this is very important work that should be supported by libertarians, which is why I support him financially each month, and I think that you should check it out too at thegarrisoncenter.org. Now, back to the point, Tom pointed out in a recent article on his blog that Johnson is hugely in debt with his campaign. But what's even worse is that he has lied about it to the FEC and to the Libertarian Party, apparently. Now, I could give two shits that he lied to the FEC, but lying to the LP to get the nomination is beyond the pale. I'm going to read excerpts directly from Tom's blog. In 2012, Gary Johnson ran for president as a Republican and racked up six figures in campaign debt before dropping out of the Republican Party, declaring his candidacy for the LP's nomination, and dismissing questions about his campaign debt by assuring libertarians that could help him get a government welfare check, matching funds from the Federal Election Commission to erase that debt. He got the nomination, he got the welfare check, then he ran his general election campaign 7 figures into debt which remains unpaid to this very day, all while campaigning as the fiscally responsible presidential candidate. On April 20th, 2012, Johnson's campaign committee filed its FEC report for campaign activity up through the end of March of 2012. That report declared that the campaign had an outstanding debt of $152,000 and some change. 2 weeks later, in early May, Johnson received the Libertarian Party's 2012 presidential nomination. Later that month, in the campaign's FEC report for the period up through the end of April, it reported a similar debt level, $150,000 and some change. Between receiving the LP's nomination and the end of 2012, the Johnson campaign received approximately $550,000 in matching funds courtesy of U.S. taxpayers, a welfare check. A break from the timeline for one important point of information. When a campaign receives federal taxpayer money in the form of matching funds, it is required to use that money to pay off campaign debt before it can use it for anything else. No problem. The campaign's debt as of April-May 2012 was only about $150,000. So that left a lot of Uncle Sugar's money to do other things with, right? Well, no. Because now we come to the next point in the timeline. In early 2013, the campaign filed amended versions of the April 2012 report in which it disclosed that its debt as of that time had been not about $150,000 at all, but it actually exceeded $1 million. Oops. Now, if you honestly believe that $800,000 to $900,000 is the result of a simple accounting error, then I have some oceanfront property in Arizona to sell you. As Tom said, quote, "The far more likely explanation is that the Johnson campaign defrauded the Libertarian Party's convention delegates by lying to them about its debt levels in order to get the presidential nomination, and that the Johnson campaign also defrauded American taxpayers in order to get a large spendable windfall." Look, I know that talking about the nasty parts of the darling of many in the LP is not the best way to gain listeners to this show, but I cannot stand idly by while this guy gets the nomination. I am under no illusions that my podcast will have much, if any, effect on the nominating convention, but I can certainly hope that it will at least reach some delegates before the end of May. So that leaves us with a question. But if not Johnson, then who deserves that nomination? Next up is Austin Peterson from episode 35 of The Lava Flow. I titled this episode The Libertarian Donald Trump Edition, and you can listen to the entire episode at thelavaflow.com/35. Here's that segment. Austin Peterson is not only the youngest of the candidates for president in 2016, he is also the most childish in a very bad way. Let's be clear. right up front. Austin Peterson is, in some ways, a very good candidate. He's also very libertarian in many ways. He has a longer pedigree with the Libertarian Party than both Gary Johnson and John McAfee put together. And he actually talks like a real small L libertarian most of the time. Philosophically, on most of the issues, Austin and I are very close. He's well-spoken, clean-cut. He held his own very well in the John Stossel debate, and Austin even put Gary Johnson on the defensive about the Nazi cake by hammering him on it. Before the Stossel debate, I was 100% against Peterson. I'm not 100% against him anymore. Now it's more like 99% against him. My biggest issue with his debate performance was his very wooden and rehearsed sounding style. It was clear that he was working very, very hard to get quick sound bites out instead of being genuine. In his defense, though, debates are basically theater, and he seemed to be playing to that, but I just don't feel like it came off very well. My issues with Austin are that he is basically an internet troll writ large and in real life. His personality, his comments, his stirring up of shit constantly is just petulant. He is like an anthropogenic representation of Facebook. It started long before his presidential run with his terrible website, which I am not going to name here because I wouldn't wish a visit on it to my worst enemy. And his silly podcast that, thank God, seems to have gone the way of the dodo. I've been anti-Peterson for a long time, pretty much ever since he started his one-man campaign against the non-aggression principle. The same principle that he has to sign to become a member of the Libertarian Party. He even said on Facebook that if you accept the NAP, you are not a libertarian. What? My issues with him became even stronger when he posted an article on his site titled, quote, 5 Reasons Why I'm Not an Anarchist, and goes on in that article to commit several logical fallacies and essentially misrepresent anarchism and show himself for the status that he is. He also showed his fundamental misunderstanding of basic human rights. Look, it would be one thing to logically debate a topic like anarchism or the NAP, but to be so childish in his behavior is where I draw the line. I don't give his thinking any credence when he uses these type of tactics, and no one else should either. We should not reward these sort of comments and tactics. As I mentioned earlier, he is an internet troll writ large. Here are just a sample of some of his confirmed comments on Facebook and other social media. Quote, I'm not saying the non-aggression principle is wrong because it's stupid. That would be a logical fallacy. I'm saying it's wrong and the non-aggression principle is stupid. Quote, well, it's lies from top to bottom, as to be expected from the Losertarian caucus. You'll all be out on the streets after my victory in Orlando, rest assured. Quote, I don't take crap from losers like you. Quote, you tubby piece of shit. You couldn't even approach 1/4 of the pyramid of pussy that I swim in on a regular basis. It's because I have class, motherfucker. Quote, suck it up, buttercup. Quote, low testosterone as evidenced by his spindly frame. Quote, LOL, neckbeard. Quote, if I wanted your opinion, I would ask for it. Otherwise, cram it. Now tell me, is this the sort of guy that we want representing the Libertarian Party in 2016? Of course not. Now that we know what he says about libertarians who don't support him, what does Austin have to say about the candidates that he's running against? Does he even have any respect for them at all? He called Steve Kerbell sleaze and the lowest of the low. McAfee, according to Peterson, is nothing more than a drug addict. Johnson is a low-energy drug dealer. Okay, well, that one's true, but that's beside the point. And as I mentioned, Austin is always trying to stir shit up, and generally with a lot of lies and mistruths. He has been called outright lying on several occasions in this campaign. The first was when he illogically claimed that the Gary Johnson campaign had bought up all the hotel rooms at National Convention Hotel to intentionally block out Peterson supporters. Peterson's quote on Facebook, quote, Johnson's campaign bought every spare hotel room in the convention center to deny us access. He said this without a shred of evidence and nothing to back it up. People who have gone back to fact check this have found it laughable. Not to mention, why would a campaign spend what would be potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars on a race that they are likely going to win on the first ballot? It just makes no sense. Austin also made false claims against the McAfee campaign later by saying McAfee's campaign manager quit, in part because Johnson apparently just received an enormous donation from a special interest. Again, no evidence to back it up. Nobody considers it credible. It's just a total lie. McAfee's campaign manager did step down as campaign manager, yes, but he is still 100% on the staff of the McAfee campaign. He essentially took another, less demanding role with the campaign. He needed to step down to spend time on some other things, and it had nothing to do with Johnson. Peterson has also gone on record as saying that Ron Paul, quote, sounds like he hates America, and that Ron Paul is a Soviet apologist. These are the tactics of a desperate man who has no morals. And it is clear that he has no morals with his utter rejection of the underlying moral principle of libertarianism. He may act like a libertarian and talk like a libertarian, but the man is no libertarian. Austin Peterson also has an adulthood problem. These comments and these tactics are things that I would expect from a 20-year-old, but a 35-year-old? Come on. Peterson deserves neither respect nor consideration for the LP nomination. He's a less relevant, weaker version of Trump, insulting, denigrating, and just a massive asshole. Although he does have better hair than Trump. If Peterson doesn't end up dead last in this presidential race, then the LP has proven that it is still the party of Bob Barr, and that's not a good thing. And finally, I took on both John McAfee and Daryl W. Perry in episode 36 of The Lava Flow. You can listen to the entire episode at thelavaflow.com/36. And here's that segment. So let's just jump right into this, starting with John McAfee. Now, McAfee first announced that he was going to run for president under his newly created Cyber Party. Now, I can only assume that when he finally found out how difficult and expensive it is to actually be on the ballot in all 50 states, he decided that that wasn't going to work. So in December, he announced instead that he was going to seek the Libertarian Party nomination. When McAfee first announced his run, I thought it was pretty much a joke. But a friend of mine, who I greatly respect, told me to pay close attention to John McAfee, so I have. And I'm a little bit surprised, even though he's only been a big L libertarian for 6 months, which is a big concern for me. Now, his first website had a couple of very unlibertarian items on his issue page that I've talked about on this show in the past, but I was assured by his campaign manager at the time that those were written by his former campaign staff and did not reflect his true beliefs. Now, I do find this a bit hard to believe. If I were running for president, I think I certainly would require my issues to be approved by me before being posted, but that's just me. Looking at his current website, it is pretty much 100% libertarian on his issues. But we all know that McAfee has had a very, very colored past. But in my opinion, he has answered all of the questions related to that sketchy past very well. From his past drug use, to being linked to a murder in Belize, to his DUI. There are plenty of interviews with him discussing these topics out there on the internet if you're interested to see how he answered those questions. It's a little bit too much to get into in this show. I must say that I have been pretty impressed with how he's handled himself in debates and in interviews and his answers to questions. He's done a much better job than Johnson, and at least as well, if not better, than Peterson. In every debate that I've watched, and I've watched many, his answers are always extremely libertarian, even going as far as saying that he can mathematically show how he can balance the budget without any taxes. And he's a mathematician, so that's really saying something. I have searched the internet all over, and I have not been able to find a direct statement from him about the non-aggression principle specifically, though. But his opening statement on the John Stossel debate was one of the best descriptions of it that I've seen without actually naming it. He said, quote, "Libertarianism is grounded in the concept of liberty. But what is liberty? Liberty means that our bodies and our minds belong to ourselves. Liberty is lost when governments decide what is right or wrong regarding what we may do with ourselves. Now that's about as libertarian as it gets. I really wish I could find something from his mouth about the non-aggression principle, but I just can't. I had somebody tell me that he supported it in one of his debates, but I've watched many of the debates and I just can't find it anywhere. At least, though, he's not completely against it, like Johnson and Peterson, it seems. McAfee has put out a couple of fantastic videos in the last couple of weeks for his campaign. These are some of the best videos that I have ever seen from a Libertarian presidential candidate, and it really shows that he is serious about this race. One of these videos is called Vote Different, and it encourages viewers to be a Libertarian and to vote different. The other is called War is Hell, and it asks the question, how much should we spend on killing to make us feel safe? This video is full of imagery on the war machine at work, and it tells us to let life live, which is his campaign slogan. Now, both of these videos are the work of McAfee's running mate, Judd Weiss, a photographer and videographer and a longtime libertarian activist. If you haven't seen these videos, I highly recommend you do. I do have concerns about McAfee, though. First, as I mentioned last episode, his campaign manager stepped down, but was, I was told, still a part of the campaign. But just a couple of days ago, that campaign manager, Christopher Thrasher, has now endorsed Gary Johnson. Now, I'm not sure what the hell happened there, but that's a huge concern. Also, while we're on the topic of Johnson, McAfee has said that he will not stay in the Libertarian Party if Gary Johnson gets the nomination, saying, quote, "If Johnson does get the nomination, then it is clear that I misjudged that party and I do not belong here." Those are pretty strong words, and this shows that his commitment to the LP may not be very strong. Considering he's only been a part of the LP for 6 months, it sounds like he will likely disappear after the election completely. And he is quite a bit divisive and condescending in a lot of ways, which could backfire on him in a national debate or a campaign. For example, just last week, he tweeted that he was skipping the Washington, D.C. Libertarian Party debate because he had a previous engagement to go, quote, compete in a whale fucking contest. I kid you not. He then goes on to say, quote, "I cannot tolerate another debate listening to Johnson declare Uber everything and I climb mountains and relearning that Austin's birthplace was near Liberty. It's like watching Citizen Kane 50 times in a row." While I won't take his seriousness as a candidate in question, statements like this will certainly make others feel that way, and they're certainly not the way that a national campaign for president should be run. This could seriously put the Libertarian Party at a major disadvantage if he acts like this in a national campaign. The last candidate that I'm going to highlight is Daryl W. Perry. Daryl is a very long-term libertarian activist and has been involved in the Libertarian Party for many years. He's also a participant in the Free State Project and moved to New Hampshire just like I did, but several years ago to help bring about liberty in our lifetime here. Daryl is, without a doubt, the most libertarian of all of the candidates. He is the most principled of the bunch, hands down, and he lives those principles. He is a member of, as many of us jokingly call it, the libertarian wing of the Libertarian Party. He's a state committee coordinator for the Libertarian Party Radical Caucus, and he's the secretary and former vice chair of the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire. He also holds the distinction of being the only candidate of the four that I've discussed that has actually come out as 100% in support of the non-aggression principle, strangely enough. I guess that I should be surprised, but this is the party that nominated Bob Barr in 2008 after all. Perry's website says, quote, "The goal of the Daryl W. Perry for President campaign is to run the most libertarian presidential campaign in history, to promote the ideas of liberty as boldly and as often as possible, and to give as many people as possible the chance to vote for an actual libertarian in November 2016. And interestingly enough, Daryl chose longtime libertarian activist Will Coley to be his running mate. This is interesting because Will is the very first Muslim in American history to run for vice president. Will Coley is the founder of Muslims for Liberty and has brought libertarianism to Muslims around the world. And on top of all of this, I consider Daryl a personal friend. So you might think that after all that I've said, it's pretty much in the bag that I will be endorsing Daryl Perry, but I do have some concerns with him. First is his stance on campaign donations. He only accepts campaign donations in cryptocurrency and precious metals. While I understand his desire to limit the use of fiat currency and to spread the knowledge of cryptocurrency, this is just not a practical stance to take in a run for president, and this will severely limit his ability to raise money in a nationwide campaign. Daryl also sent an open letter to the Federal Election Commission saying that he will not supply a statement of candidacy or any financial report to the FEC. Saying, quote, "As a libertarian, I do not believe the Federal Election Commission has legitimate authority to regulate the fundraising of candidates or donations of those giving to candidates or their campaigns." Again, I fully understand his stance here, and I agree with him. And I took a similar stance with my Arkansas race for state house and had been fined for not supplying my financial statements. But there is too much at stake for the Libertarian Party around the country if the presidential candidate is not filing with the FEC. This could conceivably cause issues with getting his name on ballots, getting him in debates, or any number of things. Now, that's all speculation because we've never had this happen before, but do we want to take that chance? I don't know yet. These two issues give me a lot of pause, and they could have severe negative impact on the Libertarian Party if Daryl were to get the nomination. I know that Daryl is running a very serious campaign, and I know it is his mission to win. But these two issues, while very principled, could be seen by other people to tell a different story. If we are to play in the devil's playground, we have to play by the devil's rules or we're not going to get a turn. This is one of several reasons that I have decided to stay out of electoral politics on a personal level, because I got tired of playing by the devil's rules. But you can't have it both ways, and Daryl seems to want that. So now that you've listened to all of that, not much has changed in my mind. Gary is still a statist. Austin is still a troll. McAfee is still crazy, and Daryl is still principled. I do have some news, though. McAfee finally did come out with a video showing his support for the non-aggression principle just yesterday on Facebook, May 15th. He said, quote, "The non-aggression principle is vital to the sanity and health of our nation, as well as to the sanity and health of our lives. You cannot stand sanely on any other point other than understanding that non-aggression is the only way one can live." Wow. I asked for a more clear statement from him on this exact position, and he delivered in spades. I gotta say, that's a pretty powerful comment. The show notes to this episode will have a link to that full video, and you can get to those show notes at thelavaflow.com/bonus-LP. So that makes only 2 out of the 4 candidates who actually support the NAP. And that is pretty fucking sad, considering that this is the Libertarian Party nomination. What would be even more sad is if one of the 2 non-principled candidates in this race wins the nomination. I hope the delegates in convention realize this before it's too late. I also sincerely hope the LP delegates vote for principle over politics. Gary may be prominent as a politician, but he is the least principled in this race. As Tom Knapp has recently reported on his blog at napster.blogspot.com, New Mexico state government spending grew faster than the rate of inflation, faster than the rate of population, and even more damning, faster than federal spending has grown under Barack Obama, all while Gary Johnson was governor. The state debt more than doubled under Johnson's governorship. He also supported the death penalty strongly as governor, even going so far as to support reducing the age at which children can be tried as adults and summarily killed by the state to as low as 13 years old. Gary Johnson is a statist, plain and simple. He no more deserves this nomination than Bob Barr deserved it in 2008. Please don't make the same mistakes again and again by voting for electability over principle. The LP is the party of principle for a reason. Let's prove it this year. Austin Peterson is nothing more than a childish troll. And while he does seem libertarian on many issues, he is completely against the NAP, presumably even though he signed a version of the NAP to join the Libertarian Party. And he is just a horrible human being based on the many comments that he's made on Facebook towards his detractors that I talked about earlier. We already have one Donald Trump too many in the general election. We do not need another one. Please do not vote for this asshat. John McAfee, while a newer member of the Libertarian Party, seems to understand libertarianism much better than either Johnson or Peterson. He describes our philosophy and principles extremely well, and more importantly, he seems to live by them. I can't help but like the guy. He owns his very crazy past, just as he should. He speaks extremely well and puts out fantastic content in blogs and videos. And his name is well known, as is his past. I'd be willing to bet that he is more well known than Gary Johnson, and certainly more well known than Austin Peterson. McAfee's hilarious video on how to remove McAfee antivirus has over 6 million views and counting. Now on to my friend Daryl W. Perry, who, like I said, is the most principled candidate in this race. He is a libertarian through and through, and he has spent years working to promote libertarianism in many ways, writing a book, blogging, with 3 podcasts, and so on. He fully supports the NAP, like McAfee, and he speaks the message of liberty extremely well. If you missed seeing Daryl on the Libertarian Presidential debate on RT.com, you need to go check it out. I do have a link to that video in the show notes to this episode as well at thelavaflow.com/bonus-LP. My favorite quote of Daryl's was in his opening statement, where he says he is running for the LP nomination to make the Libertarian Party libertarian again. And that's dead on, because the last 2 presidential cycles, the Libertarian Party has put up non-libertarian candidates for president. So this is where my difficulty comes in. Obviously, I can't endorse Johnson or Peterson, but both of these candidates, McAfee and Perry, would be excellent choices for the LP as the presidential candidate. McAfee, while well known, has a pretty shady past that could turn off a lot of voters, but this will also attract other voters. Perry's principle will get the message of freedom and true libertarianism out there further than it has ever been in quite some time. Since I am always 100% principle over party, as you know if you listen to this show at all, my official endorsement has to go to Daryl W. Perry as the most principled candidate in this race, hands down. Daryl's voice, the voice of true libertarianism, true peace, love, and liberty, deserves to be heard in this race, and I hope that you can help me with that. In order to have Daryl's voice in the debate, he needs 10% of the tokens that will be given to all the delegates at the convention. There is no doubt that Johnson, Peterson, and McAfee will have enough support needed to ensure that they get in the debate that will be broadcast live on C-SPAN. Daryl is a bit of an underdog, and he may not have the support needed to get in those debates. Please, if you want to hear the most libertarian voice in the debate, make sure that you give Daryl your debate token. This in no way means that you will vote for him or that you have to vote for him, although I hope you do, but it will at least make sure that his voice is in that very important debate. Now, I know that there are lots of you out there who will likely disagree with me on this and believe fully that the mission of this race is to elect a libertarian U.S. president. Now, we all know that's not going to happen in 2016. We have a long road ahead of us to make more libertarians before we could ever think about winning a U.S. presidential election. Daryl Perry teaches that principle better than anyone in this race. But McAfee has also been doing a close second, in my opinion. I really want Daryl to win this nomination, but I would not be sad to see McAfee win this nomination by any stretch. I will, on the other hand, be very disappointed if Johnson or Peterson wins this nomination. This will be further proof that the Libertarian Party is no longer libertarian. After nominating Republicans in 2008 and 2012 as president, and with 2 of the top candidates this year being Republicans, Peterson and Johnson, how about we do something a little bit different this time and nominate someone other than a Republican for president from the Libertarian Party? Please join me in promoting real libertarianism in 2016. What a concept! Thank you for listening to me rant. I hope this has really helped some people solidify their decisions, and I want to wish Darrell W. Perry the very best of luck in this nomination. I hope he's listening. Good luck, Darrell. Until next time, keep striking the root.
Thank you for listening to The Lava Flow at thelavaflow.com. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe now at thelavaflow.com/subscribe. This has been a Pax Libertas Productions podcast.